So at the very beginning, I want to divide education up from one perspective into three things. The first of those things is information. Information is one component of education. The next component is understanding. And the third component is application. So I'll repeat myself. What was the first one was information. The second one was, I forgot. Understanding, good. And the third one is application. So information, understanding, and application. And just to make this very, very simple for all of us, inshallah, a child can memorize Surah Al-Ikhlas. A child can memorize even the entire Quran. And you can even argue that that child inside of him or her has a lot of information. They have that. If you ask them to recite, they'll recite it perfectly. What they don't yet possess is what? Is understanding. A child can memorize, in mathematics class, a child can memorize the times table. They can memorize 8 times 8 is 64. They can memorize the entire times table. Even if they understand it, they may not be able to truly what? Understand what that means. How is that beneficial? What does that do for me? They're not able to understand yet. So information is one thing. It's important. It is an important thing. But it's different from understanding. And understanding is important, but understanding is different from, what was the third piece? Application. So these are three separate things. Now what happens sometimes is we emphasize application. In our talks, in our emphasis in Islam, we say al-amal, right? So we have to act on what we know. Yes, application is important, but application is actually the third piece of the puzzle. Before application, you have to have what? Understanding. And before understanding, you have to have what? Information. So for example, talking about examples, today, this afternoon in the khutbah, I talked to you about one example Allah gives in the Quran. About examples themselves, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. He says, وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. Nobody understands them except people who have information, who have knowledge. People of knowledge understand the example. So Allah mentioned the information component first, and then He mentioned the understanding component. Both of them go hand in hand. Of course, if one, for example, does not have knowledge of the Arabic language, if one does not have knowledge of what Allah says, if one does not have knowledge of, tafsir, of what the Prophet ﷺ himself explained about an ayah, etc., then you can forget about understanding. That next step is not even going to happen. And the other component here, my teacher actually used slightly different terminology, and I respect that terminology, so I'll share it with you. There is a difference between saying this person has a lot of information and this person has a lot of knowledge. There's a difference between those two things. I'll say them again. This person has a lot of what? Information, and this person has a lot of knowledge. The argument is, you can say someone has knowledge when the first two pieces are combined. What I mean by that is information and understanding are combined, then you have what is called knowledge. Okay, so we shouldn't confuse knowledge with just information. There's a lot of information on the internet. You can get a lot of information. You can download a lot of information on your phone. You can do that. You can read a lot of books and access a lot of information. Actually, on a daily basis, we are exposed to tons and tons of information. But unfortunately, that information does not increase in our knowledge. Our knowledge doesn't advance. Because the gap between information and understanding, there is a gap between those two things. Okay? Now, of course, the third thing I told you was application or, practice. Application, right? Now, interestingly, in Islamic terminology, you have this issue too. You have al-ilm, information. You have al-aql, understanding. And when you have this ilm and aql together, al-faham if you call it, right? You have these two things together and you act on it. Al-amal, al-ilmu al-nafi'u wal-amalu bihi. They say, فَذَلِكَ هُوَ الْحِكْمَةِ. That's actually what is called wisdom. Wisdom in Islam is when you have knowledge, not information, knowledge and action together, application together. That's the third stage, hikmah. But hikmah a little bit later on. I want to talk about these first two stages first, information and understanding, these two things. Now what happened in Islamic history, for a long, long time, the information of Islam has been available. It's, Arabic education was widespread, Quran education was widespread. The Arabic language was actually a common second language in almost every Muslim land, even the ones that are non-Arab. So Arabic was actually the common language of the Muslims for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, if you go to an interesting website like altafsir.com, which is the Jordanian government's effort to compile as many tafasir in one website as they can, they've built a database of tafasir together. There's maybe 100, 150 tafasir in one place, right? When you look through the names of the mufassirun, actually the vast majority of them are not Arab. The vast majority of them are from some other region that took in Arabic. There are Andalusian scholars, there are African scholars, there are Indian scholars, وكلهم يعني كتبوا بالعربية. All of them authored their works in Arabic. So Arabic was accessible. It was accessible knowledge. But the thing about understanding was, you have to go to the alim to understand. So you've heard the stories, people would travel to different lands to go sit under a scholar to understand, to try to understand the Quran better, to try to understand the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ better, etc., right? So you can have the information, but if you really want understanding, you must go to the scholar, and you must sit at their feet, and you must learn from them. And actually, historically, individuals were institutions. We didn't have something called the University of so-and-so and so. We had Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. We had Imam Malik rahimahullah. We had Shafi'i rahimahullah. We had these scholars, and students would go and flock to them and learn. There were certain individuals, they were the university. They were themselves the university. So you go to them. You don't say, I'm going to the University of so-and-so. Like nowadays we say, I'm going to Jami'at al-Azhar. I'm going to al-Qura. I'm going to Islamic University Medina. I'm going to Darul Ulum Deoband. I'm going to Nadwatul Ulama. I'm going to these institutions to study. In the Western sense, we say, I'm going to the University of Chicago. I'm going to SMU. I'm going to this school or that school. Back in the day, what did you say? I'm going to Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. They were the institution. And what's really interesting about that, on a side note, is that the highest forms of education in the West is what? The PhD, doctorate, right? And in the doctorate program, what do you end up with? You end up with one mentor. You end up with one mentor that is going to guide you through your PhD thesis. So you end up in the highest form of education where the ummah began with its education, with a mentor that is going to guide you in your process. Now the reason for having that mentor, this is also important to understand, before we lay the framework for how we're going to do this ourselves. The reason to go to a person was not just to get information. You can get the information. You didn't just want to get the information. You also wanted to get what? The understanding. The understanding. So you went to them not just for the information, but also for the understanding. But not even that. As-suhbah. As-suhbah salihah. In their company, you would learn how to act on that knowledge. In their company, the scholar themselves was the case study of how do you act on this knowledge. So when you have the scholar of hadith, every time he's about to quote a hadith, he goes and makes wudu, right? And then he tells the hadith. Or before he teaches his dars, he teaches something about the Quran, he prays to Allah Azza wa Jal, he makes dua, and then he starts teaching about the Quran. The students would see that and say, man, our teacher has a lot of respect for what he does. He realizes he's dealing with something very powerful. And he realizes he's got a huge responsibility on him, and look at how he turns to Allah before he turns to us. You can't learn that in a textbook. You have to sit in the class and see the teacher do it every day. And then you say, wow, we're learning something from it. There are different words used for that. I mean, the modern English term I used was application, right? Application. But back in the day, you would call it khuluq, you'd call it adab, you'd call it usloob, you'd call it suluk, right? You'd call it suhbah, you'd call it all of these things. But at the end of the day, all of it is what? That's how you apply the knowledge. So you don't go to the person only for information and knowledge and understanding. You also go to them to learn from their character. This was the third piece. And this is, of course, the piece. After this, you can have wisdom. After this, you can learn how to apply this stuff yourself, right? Now, when we talk about Islamic education, we cannot forget that we have to give importance to information, because it's important. We have to have the right information. We have to have authentic information. We have to have clear, concise information. Then it's important that between information, you could read something. Is it possible you read something and I read something, you understand something different, I understand something different? Is that possible? Sure. So information is not enough. You have to have a good method for developing the right understanding, because there are people who read the same thing and they come up with different understandings. There has to be a method by which you understand. And those that have gone through this process and have trained themselves and are educated in not just understanding the right thing, but teaching you how to understand, teaching you how to think, that's an important process. That has to be in place. So information is important, understanding is important. Information is a project by itself. Information is a project by itself. Understanding is a separate project by itself. And of course, what's the third critical project? Application. What's the point of all this information and nothing changes practically? What's the point if my child memorizes Quran and studies Arabic and knows 5 tafasir and he could read this and that and he could, do the i'rab of the ayah, but my child doesn't pray on time and doesn't care? What's the point? There's no goal achieved. So what if he can recite beautifully? So what's happened is, because these are three distinct concerns, and they each deserve time and attention and a strategy. Each one of them requires a strategy. We have to really seriously think about how we are going to address each of them and put them together for us to say we have a strategy for Islamic education. What has happened so far, there was originally an emphasis on information. I'll speak, for example, because I have personal experience. I'll speak, for example, of Muslims that live in, India, Pakistan, South Asia, that region. There's a particular philosophy about Islam. There's a particular approach to teaching our children Islam. What is that? They should learn the Nurani Qaida, they should learn to recite the Quran. After they learn to recite the Quran, they should memorize a couple of short surahs at least. After they memorize a couple of short surahs, they should at least have some qari come to the house, and they go through the entire Quran and recite the entire Quran. They say, Khatmul Quran. They just go through, let's go through the entire Quran. Finish that. In official schooling, in Muslim countries even, in the official Islamic curriculum, you have at least studied the seerah a little bit. A little bit about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Maybe 1 or 2 surahs, the tafsir of them, and that's it. Right, for example, in Pakistan, they have until metric 10th grade, right? You have like a couple of surahs, Alam nashrah laka sadrak, wadduha, wallayli idha saja. You have tafsir of those surahs, tashrih they call them. Tashrih of those surahs, and you read those, and that's it. That's your education in Islam. What that means is that Islamic education has been reduced just to information. All of what I described so far, reciting the Quran, memorizing a few surahs, reading a little bit of something, a couple of things from books, all of that is what? Information. Understanding does not happen from books. Understanding does not come from books. You cannot just read books and claim that you genuinely have understanding. Understanding comes from discussion. Understanding comes from questions and answers. Understanding comes when the teacher asks you a question to make sure did you understand, and you're not able to answer, and he discusses it with you, and then you say, I get it. So long as we are relying on books alone, so long as that's the case, and that's the primary curriculum, just learn to read this book, finish this text, finish this text, finish this text, our emphasis is still on what? Information. It's still on information. Now, even in the outside the Indo-Pak subcontinent, you have emphasis on information. You have students, for example, that travel abroad and they study Arabic, or there are Islamic schools and al-madaris al-thanawiyya, even in the Arab world, many of them, they have an emphasis on education. And let's just say Arabic education, for example, right? So some student might memorize al-Ajurrumiyya. Ibn al-Ajurrum, right? So he might memorize a grammatical text. Now the guy knows the Ajrumiyya by heart. But if you sit him down and say, well, what does that mean? What does this first line mean? And how does it apply to this ayah? He's not able to do that because he only learned what? Information. He didn't quite develop understanding. I know how to say that. I know that it says, فِعِل مَاضِي مَبْنِي عَلَى الْفَتْحِ وَعَلَامَةُ وَعَلَامَةُ رَفْعِ الْفِعِل, this. They could say that. What does that mean? What's the point of that? I don't know, we just memorized it. We just said it like that. There is an emphasis on information. Now in Western education, there's actually a great deal of emphasis on understanding. But unfortunately, in Western education, there is a lack of emphasis on information. What do I mean? They don't make you memorize anything. They don't make you memorize, they just want you to what? Understand. So all the exams are what? Multiple choice questions. True, false, multiple choice, right? Mixing and matching answers. Right? That's what they are. Read the following passage and answer these questions. Those are the kinds of questions you get in the Western world in any field of education. It's all about understanding. Now you go to India, Pakistan, Egypt, Jordan, Algeria, Sudan. What are the students doing all day? Doesn't matter what subject. What are they doing all day? They're memorizing.